Today, we're going to take a purely observational look at a trading methodology. It's called the market DNA cycle, and we'll be walking through one specific cycle for the US 100 asset, step by step, just as it was recorded. Think of this as a documentary walkthrough. Okay, let's dive in.
So here's our game plan for today. We'll start with a quick look at the specific cycle we're observing. Then we'll move through the key documented events. First up is the initial entry plan, which is known as Phase 1. That's followed by a significant event they label as Phase 3. After that, we'll check in on the cycle's current status, and we'll wrap it all up with the final target and some really important disclaimers.
Okay, so the cycle we're zeroing in on is for the US 100 asset. In the source material, it's got a specific ID, US100_1_3. Our goal here is simply to follow the record, We're just looking at what was written down and what was captured visually, from its very start all the way to its current point.
So you might be wondering, what exactly is a market DNA cycle? Well, it's described as a proprietary geometric system with 4 distinct phases. The most important thing to keep in mind as we go through this is that we are only documenting the observed sequence of events. We're not going to analyze or try to interpret the why behind any of it. We are simply narrating the record just as it was captured.
All right, let's kick things off right at the beginning. This is what's labeled Phase 1, the entry plan. And this is a snapshot of all the parameters just as they were documented back on November 21st, 2025. This chart right here, this is our starting line. The documentation for this cycle officially kicks off at this very point. You can see the price is at the primary entry level marked with that M. And at that moment, the price that was recorded was $24,399. Right from the get-go, the plan laid out 2 potential entry points. The main one, the primary entry M, was that $24,399 level we just saw. But there was also a secondary entry, which is labeled P of C, and that was defined down at $23,719. And it's important to remember, both of these levels fall under the umbrella of that initial Phase 1 plan. Okay, now let's dig into the risk parameters that were set up for this plan. It's all based on a hypothetical capital of $100,000. The maximum expected drawdown was set at 5%, which comes out to $5,000. The plan also specifies a few other key variables for its calculations, things like a trapezoid time duration of 54 days, a third triangle domain of 7.4%, a risk coefficient of 2, and a contract size of 10 units. So you take all those parameters we just looked at, and they're used to calculate a really key number. For this plan, the size for each trade was determined to be 0.07. And this isn't just a random number, right? It's a direct output from that whole risk management framework. And to be absolutely crystal clear on how they got that trade size, the source material gives us this exact explanation. I'm going to read it word for word. Both trade sizes are calculated using the hypothetical capital, the investor's maximum allowed drawdown, the third triangle domain percentage, the risk coefficient, and the contract size. The initial plan also mapped out a couple of potential profit scenarios, kind of like what-if situations based on how the cycle could play out. Scenario 1 was if you entered at M and then exited at a target called the trapezoid top. That projected a profit of about $1,062 for an expected annual return of 7.16%. Then there's Scenario 2. This one assumed entries at both M and P of C, with an exit at a different target, Apex N. This scenario projected a higher profit of over $2,000, with an expected annual return of 14.66%. Okay, let's jump forward in time. 5 days later, on November 26th, we get to the next documented event in the sequence. The log shows what's called the N-level event, which is also known as Phase 3. This side-by-side view really tells the story. On the left, that's the chart from the very beginning, at Phase 1. And on the right, that's the chart 5 days later, at the exact moment of this M-level event. It's a really clear visual documentation of the price movement that happened. So what's the big deal about this phase? It's pretty straightforward. The record shows the price hit a key level called Apex N, and the exact price recorded at that point was $25,297. Within this model, that N level is defined as a safe exit point. It's also really important to note what didn't happen here. The documentation for this phase is clear. The price moved directly up to N. It never dipped down to that secondary entry level, P of C. So that level was never actually triggered. And that brings us right up to the current status of the cycle as recorded in the source material. The phase we're in now is identified as mirror contact. So let's take a look at what the documentation shows for this stage. Looking at the updated chart, the sequence of events becomes really clear. The documented path for this particular cycle went from phase 1 straight to phase 3 and has now entered phase 2. This highlights something important about the model. Those phase numbers are just labels for events, not necessarily a strict 1, 2, 3, 4 chronological order. So just to be super precise, the cycle's current state is what the model calls phase 2. This phase is defined by the price making contact with something called the mirror delay line. And as we've just seen, this event happened after the end-level event of phase 3. Okay, let's move on to the final part of our documentation here. We're going to look at what actually defines the end of the cycle. And then we'll go over some very, very important notices that come with all this material. So what's the finish line for this cycle's journey according to the model? Well, phase 4, which is called cycle completion, has a really clear trigger. The cycle is officially considered complete when the price reaches the trapezoid top. And for this particular cycle, that projected completion level is 25,916. You know, going through this whole process, it kind of leaves us with a question to think about. What can we actually learn from observing a highly structured market approach like this from start to finish? Watching a plan with all its predefined rules, and then seeing the sequence of events as they actually happened.
Now, before we wrap this up, it is absolutely essential that we go over the following disclaimers. First and foremost, this is not financial advice. The model's guidelines specifically prohibit using leverage above 10, and it advises you not to invest essential personal funds. This analysis is part of a public model documentation, and it's for verification purposes only. And finally, any risk management must follow the user's own specific instructions.
And with that, we've concluded our objective walkthrough of this specific market DNA cycle for the US100. If you want to learn more from the source itself, you can always visit marketdnaedge.com. Thanks so much for watching.